The cold of the city on Christmas Eve was a living thing. It seeped through the thin soles of Elara's worn-out shoes, crept up her legs, and settled deep in her bones. Her coat was a ghost of a garment, offering no real defense against the wind that sliced through the downtown streets like a blade. Each gust felt personal, a deliberate shove from a world that had long since turned its back on her. She huddled in the doorway of a large, impersonal church, not for salvation, but for survival. Tonight, the church hosted a community choir performance. The poster, tacked to a corkboard inside the vestibule, had promised a hot meal for all participants. A meal. That was the only reason she was here. Her stomach was a hollow, aching cavern. Hunger was a constant companion, a dull throb that underscored every waking moment. Singing was the last piece of herself she owned. It was the one thing Marcus had never managed to take from her. He had taken her money, her friends, her home. He had taken her confidence and ground it into dust under the heel of his expensive shoe. He had tried to take her voice, telling her she was shrill, that her little songs were pathetic. But he couldn't silence the melody that lived inside her. It was a small, flickering candle in the hurricane of her life, and tonight she would use it to buy a bowl of soup. She clutched the sheet music with numb fingers. The paper was cold and brittle. Inside the church hall, the air was thick with the smell of old wood, melting wax, and the damp wool of 100 other threadbare coats. She found a spot in the back row of the soprano section, a ghost among the other lonely souls gathered for the same reason. No one made eye contact. They were an assembly of the unseen, united by a shared, unspoken desperation. The choir director, a kind-faced woman with tired eyes, tapped her music stand. The practice began. Elara opened her mouth, and for a moment, nothing came out. Fear, cold, and hunger had seized her throat. Then she closed her eyes, shutting out the drafty hall, the worn faces, the gnawing emptiness in her belly. She thought of a time before. Marcus. A time when she sang in the sun, her voice full and free, a pure, clear note unfurled from her lips. It soared over the tentative, weary voices of the others. It was a sound of such profound, aching beauty that a few heads turned. It was a voice of heartbreak and hope, woven together into a single, crystalline thread. She poured all of it into the music, the pain, the fear, the crushing loneliness, the tiny, stubborn spark of defiance that refused to be extinguished. She sang not for God, not for the audience that would later fill the pews, but for the memory of the girl she used to be. Across town, in a car so quiet you could hear the soft whisper of the leather seats, Julian Black adjusted the rearview mirror. His daughter, Lily, was strapped into her car seat in the back, her small face illuminated by the passing glow of Christmas lights. She was 6 years old and carried the silence of someone much older. "Are we almost there, Daddy?" Her voice was a tiny whisper. "Almost, sweetheart," Julian said, his own voice a low, gentle rumble. He hated this, hated the forced cheerfulness of the holidays. It had been 2 years since his wife, Anya, had been taken from them. 2 years since the laughter had died in their sprawling, minimalist house. 2 years since Christmas had become just another day to endure. But Lily had seen the poster. "A choir, Daddy? Can we see a choir?" He could deny her nothing. She was the center of his universe, the fragile, precious heart of his life. So he had left the towering skyscraper that housed his global tech firm, canceled a meeting with Tokyo, and was now driving to a random church on the other side of the city. All for a choir. He was Julian Black, a name that opened any door, a man whose decisions moved markets, a billionaire CEO who was utterly, completely powerless to mend his own daughter's broken heart. They found seats in a sparsely filled pew near the back. The church was cold, the atmosphere subdued. Julian felt a familiar ache of loneliness settle over him. He was surrounded by his own success, yet he had never felt more isolated. Then the choir began to sing. It was uneven, a collection of tired voices doing their best. He was about to suggest they leave when a single voice rose from the chorus. It was like a beam of light cutting through a fog, pure, sorrowful, resilient. He scanned the faces in the choir loft, searching for the source. And then he saw her. She was standing in the back row, partially obscured by a pillar. A pale, thin woman with dark hair that fell around a face of striking, fragile beauty. Her eyes were closed, her expression one of utter, transcendent concentration. She wasn't just singing the notes, she was living them. He felt a strange jolt in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a very, very long time. Lily, who had been fidgeting beside him, suddenly went still. She tugged on his sleeve, her eyes wide with wonder, fixed on the woman in the choir. She leaned in close and whispered, her breath warm against his ear. "Daddy," she breathed, her voice filled with a child's pure, unfiltered awe. "That lady. She looks like an angel." Julian looked from his daughter's rapt face back to the woman. An angel? Yes, a fallen one, perhaps. One who looked like she had been through a war. Her coat was threadbare, her cheeks hollow. But her voice? Her voice was from another world. He watched her for the entire performance, unable to look away. He saw the slight tremble in her hands as she held the music. He saw the way she swayed, as if the melody were the only thing holding her upright. He saw pain, a deep, profound pain that he recognized because he lived with its cousin every single day. When the final note of Silent Night faded into the cavernous silence of the church, the spell was broken. The sparse audience offered polite applause. The choir members began to shuffle off the risers, their faces turning from performers back to weary strangers. Elara's eyes fluttered open. The world rushed back in, the cold, the hunger, the ache in her feet. The beautiful illusion was over. Now there was only the soup. She joined the slow-moving line shuffling toward a side room where folding tables had been set up. Her heart beat a little faster at the thought of something warm in her stomach. Julian stood up, a sudden, inexplicable urgency seizing him. "Wait here a moment, Lily." He moved through the dispersing crowd, his eyes locked on the woman in the thin coat. He saw her join the line for the meal, and something inside him twisted. That voice did not belong in a soup line. He approached her slowly, careful not to startle her. She was looking down, avoiding everyone, trying to remain invisible. "Excuse me," he said, his voice softer than he intended. Elara flinched, her head snapping up. Her eyes were wide, beautiful, and full of fear, like a startled deer poised to bolt. She saw a tall, impeccably dressed man standing before her. He was powerful. It radiated from him like heat. Her first instinct, honed by years with Marcus, was terror. She braced for a command, an insult, a dismissal. "You have a beautiful voice," Julian said simply. The words were so unexpected, so gentle, that she couldn't process them. She just stared, her throat suddenly tight. Thank you," she managed to whisper. "My daughter and I were in the audience," he continued, gesturing vaguely toward the pews. We were very moved. He saw the confusion and suspicion in her eyes. He had to be careful. "I know this is forward," he said, keeping his tone even and respectful. "But the soup they're serving, it doesn't look very warm. Would you allow me to buy you a proper Christmas Eve dinner?" Elara's mind reeled. A trap. It had to be a trap. Men like this didn't talk to women like her unless they wanted something. Marcus had taught her that lesson until it was carved into her soul. "No, thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'm fine." She tried to turn away, to retreat back into her invisibility. "Please," Julian said, a note of quiet pleading in his voice that surprised even him. "It's Christmas Eve. No one should be alone. Let me just buy you a meal. That's all." He wasn't looking at her with hunger or pity. He was looking at her with a strange, quiet sadness, a recognition. From behind him, a small figure appeared, clutching his hand. It was Lily. She peeked out from behind her father's leg, her large, dark eyes fixing on Elara. "Are you the angel?" Lily asked, her voice clear as a bell in the quiet hall. Elara froze. She looked from the child's innocent, curious face to the man's earnest, waiting one. Her hunger was a physical pain. The cold was relentless. She had $2 and a handful of change in her pocket. She had nowhere to go after this meal. Nowhere at all. What was the worst that could happen? Another monster? She had already survived one. Slowly, fighting every instinct for self-preservation that screamed at her to run, she gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Julian's shoulders relaxed in a wave of relief. "Thank you," he said softly. "I'm Julian, and this is Lily." "Elara," she whispered. The name felt foreign on her own tongue. It had been a long time since anyone had asked for it. He led her away from the soup line, out of the drafty church, and back into the biting cold of the night. But this time, he held open the door to a warm car, a sanctuary of leather and silence. Elara slid into the passenger seat. The warmth was shocking, a luxury her body had almost forgotten. The door closed with a solid, expensive thud, sealing them off from the rest of the world. She felt like she had stepped onto another planet. The drive to the restaurant was silent. Elara stared out the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of color. She was acutely aware of the man beside her, of the clean, subtle scent of his cologne, of the sheer size and stillness of him. He didn't try to make small talk. He just drove. The silence wasn't awkward. It was respectful, giving her space she didn't know she needed. From the back seat, she could feel Lily's eyes on her, not judging, just watching. The restaurant was the kind of place Elara had only ever seen in magazines. All dark wood, soft lighting, and hushed voices. The hostess greeted Julian by name. "Mr. Black, your table is ready." Of course, Mr. Black. Elara felt a fresh wave of anxiety. She was a stray dog brought into a palace. Her worn coat, her scuffed shoes, her very presence felt like a stain on the pristine environment. She wanted to shrink, to disappear. Julian seemed to sense it. As they were led to a secluded booth, he placed a hand lightly on the small of her back. It was not a possessive touch, but a steadying one. A simple gesture that said, "You belong here." The feeling was so foreign, her eyes burned with sudden tears. She blinked them back fiercely. Once they were seated, a waiter appeared. Julian ordered for Lily without asking. "The usual, please, Michael," and then turned to Elara. He handed her the heavy, leather-bound menu. "Please," he said gently, "order anything you like." She opened it, but the words swam before her eyes. The prices made her feel dizzy. A single entree cost more than she had seen in months. I don't know, she stammered, her voice failing her. The shame was suffocating. Julian saw her distress. He quietly took the menu from her hands. "How about the roasted chicken?" he suggested softly. "It's very good here, and perhaps some potato soup to start? It's warm." Warm. The word was an anchor. She nodded, unable to speak. He gave the order to the waiter, his voice calm and assured. He made it seem like the most natural thing in the world. When the food arrived, Elara ate. She tried to be slow, to be graceful, but the first spoonful of hot, creamy soup was a revelation. It was pure comfort, chasing the cold from her bones, quieting the desperate ache in her stomach. She closed her eyes for a second, savoring it. When she opened them, she found both Julian and Lily watching her. Lily had a small, curious smile on her face. Julian's expression was unreadable, but his eyes were soft. She felt a blush creep up her neck, but she didn't stop eating. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she was simply allowing herself to be cared for. After dinner, the silence in the car felt different, less tense, warmer. "Where can I take you?" Julian asked as he pulled away from the restaurant. The question hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. Where? There was no where. There was a corner of a homeless shelter if she was lucky. A bus station bench if she wasn't. The thought of returning to that cold, indifferent world after this brief, warm respite was devastating. The silence stretched. Elara's throat closed up. She couldn't bring herself to say the words, "I have nowhere to go." It was the final, ultimate admission of failure. Julian glanced at her. He saw the panic flickering in her eyes, the way her hands were clenched in her lap. He didn't need her to say it. He already knew. He had known the moment he saw her in that soup line. He made a decision. It was impulsive, illogical, and went against every cautious instinct he had honed as a businessman and a single father. But he thought of Lily's whisper, an angel. He thought of that voice, soaring with a pain he understood all too well. He couldn't just drop her on a street corner. He couldn't. "I have a guest suite," he said, his voice measured and calm. He kept his eyes on the road, giving her the dignity of not having to meet his gaze. "It's large, private. You could stay for a few days, just to get back on your feet. It's the least I can do for the woman who gave my daughter a moment of magic on Christmas Eve." Elara's head whipped around to look at him. "No," she said, the word automatic, a reflex of fear. "I couldn't. I can't." "Why not?" he asked simply. "Because people don't do that. You don't know me." "I know your voice," he replied, "and I know you're in trouble. That's enough for now." He turned the car onto a highway that led away from the city, toward the dark, wooded hills where the real money lived. Elara was trapped by a kindness so profound it felt more threatening than cruelty. Cruelty, she understood. She knew its rules, its patterns. This was uncharted territory, but the alternative was the freezing street. She sank back into the leather seat, a silent tear finally escaping and tracing a cold path down her cheek. She said nothing more. His house wasn't a house. It was a statement. A sprawling structure of glass, steel, and dark wood perched on a hillside overlooking the glittering expanse of the city below. It was beautiful, formidable, and as cold as a museum. Julian led her inside. The foyer was a 2-story cavern of polished marble. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of their footsteps. "The guest wing is this way," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. The suite was larger than any apartment Elara had ever lived in. A bedroom with a king-sized bed piled high with white linens, a sitting area with a sleek, modern fireplace, and a bathroom that looked like it belonged in a five-star hotel. "There are some clothes in the closet," Julian said, gesturing to a walk-in closet. "My late wife. We were about the same size. I hope you don't mind. They're just sitting there." He looked away, a flicker of pain crossing his face. "Towels are in the bathroom. If you need anything, just ask the house's AI. Her name is Iris." He was already backing out of the room, giving her space. "Get some rest, Elara," he said softly from the doorway. "You're safe here." Then he was gone, closing the door behind him with a soft click. Elara stood frozen in the center of the room. Safe. The word was a foreign language. She walked over to the door and with a trembling hand turned the lock. The click was a small, familiar comfort in this overwhelmingly alien world. She stripped off her worn-out clothes, leaving them in a sad pile on the floor. In the closet, she found simple, elegant clothes of soft cashmere and silk. She pulled on a pair of pajamas that felt softer than anything she had ever touched. Then she stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the city lights twinkling below. She was in a gilded cage, a beautiful, warm, terrifying cage. She didn't sleep. She sat in a chair all night, watching the sky lighten from black to gray, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The next morning, she crept out of her room. The house was still silent. She followed the scent of coffee to a vast, state-of-the-art kitchen. Julian was there, dressed in a simple gray sweater, making pancakes. Lily was sitting at a large island, coloring in a book. He looked up as Elara entered, and a small, tired smile touched his lips. "Good morning," he said. "Coffee?" It was so normal, so domestic. It was a life she had only ever dreamed of, and it made her ache with a longing so fierce it was a physical pain. She nodded, and he poured her a cup. She took it with a mumbled thanks and stood awkwardly by the counter. Lily looked up from her coloring, her eyes studying Elara with a child's solemn intensity. She didn't say anything, just watched. She was a gatekeeper, guarding the fragile peace of her little world. The days that followed fell into a strange, quiet rhythm. Elara stayed mostly in her suite, terrified of being in the way, of overstaying a welcome she felt she hadn't earned. She would hear Lily's small footsteps in the hall, or Julian's low voice on a business call. The house was a living thing around her, but she felt like a ghost within it. One afternoon, desperate for something to do, she wandered into the kitchen. A housekeeper had been there, but a stack of dishes had been left by the sink. On impulse, Elara washed them, the warm water a comfort to her hands. She started doing small things, wiping counters, folding a throw blanket left on the sofa, straightening a stack of books. They were tiny, invisible acts of gratitude, an attempt to pay her way in the only currency she had. Julian never mentioned it, but he noticed. He would come home from work to find a subtle warmth in the house that hadn't been there before, a softness in the air. Lily remained distant, curious, but wary. One rainy afternoon, Elara was humming to herself as she tidied the living room. It was an old lullaby her mother used to sing, a simple, gentle melody. She didn't realize anyone was listening until she turned and saw Lily standing in the doorway, her favorite stuffed bear clutched in her hand. Lily just watched her for a long moment, then turned and ran away. Elara's heart sank. She had intruded. She had crossed a line. Later that day, she found the stuffed bear lying on the floor, half hidden under a cushion. One of its button eyes was loose, hanging by a thread. Carefully, Elara took the bear back to her room. She found a small sewing kit in a drawer. Of course, this house had everything, and with meticulous, patient stitches, she reattached the eye. She even reinforced the other one, making it stronger than before. She didn't know what to do with it. Giving it back directly felt too forward. So she crept to Lily's room, her heart pounding. The door was ajar. She peeked inside. The room was a wonderland of soft pinks and whites, with a canopy bed and stars painted on the ceiling. Lily was asleep. Quietly, Elara tiptoed in and placed the mended bear on the pillow next to Lily's head. Then she slipped out as silently as she had entered. The next morning, Elara came into the kitchen for her now usual morning coffee. Lily was at the island, but she wasn't coloring. She was waiting. As Elara approached, Lily slid off her stool. She walked right up to Elara, her face serious. She held out a piece of paper. Elara took it with a trembling hand. It was a crayon drawing, a picture of a tall stick figure with a smiling face, Julian. A small stick figure holding his hand, Lily. And next to them, another figure, slightly taller than Lily, with long dark hair and big, clumsy yellow wings. An angel. Below the drawing, in wobbly, childish letters, was one word: thanks. Tears welled in Elara's eyes, hot and sudden. She knelt down so she was on Lily's level. "You're welcome," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Lily gave a small, shy smile. Then she did something that shattered Elara's remaining defenses. She leaned forward and gave her a quick, clumsy hug around the neck before running back to her seat. It was the first act of unguarded affection Elara had received in years. It felt like the sun coming out. That drawing was the key. It unlocked something in the house, in all of them. The quiet truce between Elara and Lily blossomed into a fragile friendship. Elara started reading Lily her bedtime stories. Her voice, once used to beg for a meal, now wove tales of dragons and princesses in the soft glow of a bedside lamp. Lily started talking more. Little things at first. "Can we have pancakes again? Can you show me how to hum that song?" Julian watched the transformation with a sense of quiet wonder. He saw the light returning to his daughter's eyes. He saw the color returning to Elara's cheeks. The haunted, fearful look was slowly being replaced by a gentle serenity. His vast, empty house was starting to feel like a home. The silence was no longer heavy and oppressive. It was peaceful, punctuated by the sound of Lily's laughter or Elara's soft humming. Elara started cooking more, rediscovering a passion she had long forgotten. She wasn't a gourmet chef, but she made simple, comforting food. Roasts that filled the house with their savory scent, soups that warmed them from the inside out, cookies that she and Lily would decorate with lopsided, smiley faces. She was healing, but the nights were still hard. When the house was dark and silent, the ghosts of her past would return. The memory of Marcus's cold voice, his cutting words, his chilling control. She would wake up gasping, her heart pounding, the luxurious sheets tangled around her. One night, she couldn't stand it anymore. She crept downstairs, seeking a glass of water, anything to chase away the nightmares. She found Julian in the kitchen, staring out the massive window at the city lights. He was nursing a glass of something dark. He hadn't been sleeping either. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly, without turning around. "No," she whispered, her voice rough. He turned then, his eyes shadowed with his own sleepless demons. Me neither. They stood in silence for a long moment, two insomniacs sharing the quiet dark. I never thanked you properly, Elara said, her voice barely a whisper. For everything. There's nothing to thank me for, he said. You've given Lily back her laugh. That's a gift I could never repay. She's an amazing little girl, Elara said, a genuine smile touching her lips. She's like her mother, Julian said, his voice growing thick. He looked down into his glass. Anya, she was the light. When she died... He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The loss was still a raw, open wound. I was just a shell, he finally continued, his voice low and ragged. Going through the motions, CEO of a billion-dollar company, and I couldn't even read my own daughter a bedtime story without my voice breaking. I built this house for Anya. It was supposed to be filled with life, with family. After she was gone, it was just a mausoleum, a big, empty box. He looked at Elara, his gaze direct and vulnerable. You and Lily, you're filling the box. You're letting the light in. His confession, so raw and honest, cracked open something deep inside her. He had shown her his wound. It felt safe, somehow, to show him hers. I wasn't always like this, she began, her voice trembling. So, broken. She told him about Marcus. She told him about their beginning, how charming and attentive he had been, how he had swept her off her feet. She told him how the control started subtly. A comment on her dress, a suggestion she quit her job to focus on her art, isolating her from her friends one by one until he was her entire world. She told him about the financial abuse, how he took her name off the bank accounts, giving her an allowance like a child, how he made her feel worthless, talentless, utterly dependent on him. He never hit me, she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Not in a way that left a bruise others could see. He was too smart for that. He broke things inside me instead. My confidence, my spirit. He told me my voice was annoying. He made me believe I was nothing without him. She told him about the day she left. He had been on a business trip. She had stared at her reflection in the mirror and hadn't recognized the terrified, hollowed-out woman staring back. A spark of the old Elara, the girl who sang in the sun, had flared to life. She had packed nothing, just grabbed her purse, her coat, and ran. She had a few $100 she had managed to squirrel away. It didn't last long. By the time you found me, she finished, tears streaming down her face now. I was done. I had nothing left. I was just singing for a bowl of soup. That was all I had to offer the world. Julian moved then. He closed the distance between them and gently, tentatively, wrapped his arms around her. Elara stiffened for a second, a lifetime of conditioning screaming at her to pull away. But his embrace was not confining. It was not possessive. It was just a shelter. She collapsed against him, sobbing, great, shuddering sobs that carried years of unshed grief and fear. He just held her, his hand stroking her hair, murmuring soft, meaningless words of comfort. He was wrong, Julian whispered into her hair, his voice fierce. He was wrong about everything. Your voice is a gift, and you are the strongest person I have ever met. They stood there for a long time, two broken people holding each other together in the dark. It was more than a confession. It was a trade of pain, of trust, of scars. And in that trade, a bond was forged, not of gratitude and protection anymore, but of a deep, profound, and mutual understanding. The weeks turned into a couple of months. Winter began to thaw, hinting at the promise of spring. The house was alive. Elara was no longer a guest. She was part of the fabric of their lives. She and Julian fell into an easy rhythm, a quiet dance of shared glances, inside jokes, and comfortable silences. It wasn't a romance of grand gestures, but of small, steady acts of care. He would bring her a cup of tea without asking. She would leave a file he'd forgotten on the table by the front door. It was peaceful. It was safe. And then the past came roaring back. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Julian was at a high-profile charity breakfast. He rarely did public events, but this one was for the children's hospital that had cared for Anya in her final days. A photographer had snapped a candid photo of him talking to a colleague. It wasn't the photo of Julian that caused the problem. It was the woman in the background, Elara. She was standing near a window, holding a glass of orange juice, a soft smile on her face as she watched something across the room. She looked radiant, healthy, happy. The photo was posted on a popular society blog, and Marcus saw it. To him, she was not a person. She was a possession that had escaped. Seeing her looking happy in the orbit of a man as powerful and wealthy as Julian Black ignited a possessive, narcissistic rage in him that was volcanic. He decided to destroy her. And if he could take Julian Black down with her, all the better. He contacted a notorious online tabloid. He sold them a story, a twisted, venomous narrative. He painted himself as the heartbroken, devoted partner, desperately searching for his mentally unstable girlfriend who had vanished. He painted Elara as a troubled, manipulative gold digger who had run off and who was now preying on a grieving, vulnerable billionaire. He provided photos, intimate photos from their life together, a picture of her sleeping, a video of her crying after an argument he had instigated, all twisted to support his narrative of her instability. The headline was brutal. Grieving tech billionaire Julian Black's new love, a troubled runaway with a dark past. Elara saw it on a tablet left on the kitchen counter. The world stopped. The air left her lungs. The bright, warm kitchen seemed to tilt and fade to gray. The headline, the photos, his words, they were a physical assault. The old fear, the one she had thought was finally starting to recede, came back with the force of a tidal wave. It was cold, paralyzing, absolute. He had found her. He was going to ruin this. He was going to ruin everything. He was going to drag her back into the mud, and worse, he was going to drag Julian and Lily down with her. She could hear his voice in her head, cold and satisfied. See? You can't escape me. You're nothing without me. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps. Her hands trembled so violently she dropped the tablet. It clattered to the floor. She couldn't stay. She had to run. It was the only way to protect them. She had brought this darkness to their door, and she had to lead it away. Her body moved on pure, panicked instinct. She fled to her room. The guest room, her mind screamed, and pulled a small duffel bag from the closet. She threw in a few items of the beautiful clothes that weren't hers. Her hands were shaking too badly to zip the bag. She ran down the grand staircase, her only thought to get out, to disappear, to become a ghost again. She was fumbling with the lock on the front door when it opened from the outside. Julian stood there. He had just gotten home. He took one look at her wild, terrified eyes, at the bag clutched in her white-knuckled grip, and he understood instantly. He had seen the article. His phone had been blowing up all morning. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, his movements calm and deliberate. "Elara," he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in her storm. "I have to go," she gasped, tears blurring her vision. "I'm so sorry, Julian. I have to go. I can't let him hurt you or Lily." She tried to push past him, but he didn't move. He was a mountain, immovable. He gently took the bag from her hand and set it on the floor. Then he took her trembling hands in his. They were ice cold. "You're not going anywhere," he said. His voice was soft, but underneath it was a core of pure, unyielding steel. "But he is nothing," Julian interrupted, his eyes locking onto hers, willing her to believe him. "He is a ghost, a pathetic, cruel man trying to claw back something he lost. He has no power here." "He'll ruin you," she cried, the words torn from her. "Your reputation, your company. Lily." "Listen to me," he said, his grip on her hands tightening slightly, a lifeline. "My reputation is my own to manage. My company is made of stone, and nobody will ever get close enough to Lily to harm her." He reached up and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "This is your home now, Elara," he said, the words a declaration, a vow. "He will not touch you. He will not touch us. I will not allow it." In that moment, he was not the gentle, wounded man who shared his sleepless nights with her. He was Julian Black, the titan of industry, the benevolent protector. And all of his formidable power, all of his vast resources, were now focused on one single objective: shielding her. He led her away from the door to the soft leather couch in the living room. He sat her down and wrapped a blanket around her shaking shoulders. "Iris," he said to the air, "full security lockdown, no unscheduled visitors. Monitor all communications, alert my legal team, conference call in 10 minutes. A calm female voice replied from an unseen speaker. "Acknowledged, Julian." He had gone to war for her. Elara watched him, stunned into silence. The terror was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but for the first time it was joined by something else. A flicker of hope, a sense that this time she was not fighting alone. Julian's response was swift and decisive. It was not born of anger or a desire for revenge. It was the calculated, overwhelming force of a man protecting his family. His legal team descended, not with threats, but with facts. They filed a cease and desist against the tabloid, not just for defamation, but for participating in a clear campaign of harassment. His security team, composed of former intelligence operatives, began a deep dive into Marcus Thorne. They discovered a pattern. Elara was not the first. They found 2 other women from Marcus's past. Women he had isolated, controlled, and financially ruined before discarding them. They were terrified to speak, still living in the shadow of his abuse. Julian didn't force them. He offered them protection. He offered them top-tier legal counsel, completely pro bono. He gave them a safe space to tell their stories, not to the press, but to the authorities. He was not using his power to crush Marcus, but to empower his victims. Meanwhile, the tabloid, facing a lawsuit that could bankrupt them, buckled. They issued a full retraction and a public apology. They named Marcus as their source and released the unedited, raw materials he had given them. In his vindictive rage, Marcus had overplayed his hand. The raw audio revealed his manipulative coaching, his venomous lies. He was exposed not as a heartbroken victim, but as a cruel and calculating abuser. But the final battle had to be Elara's. Julian's lawyers told her that a formal statement from her would be the final nail in the coffin, ensuring Marcus would face legal consequences for fraud and harassment. "You don't have to do this," Julian told her gently the night before the meeting. "We can handle it from here." They were in the kitchen, the scene of their first true confession. Elara looked at him, at the unwavering support in his eyes. She thought of Lily, sleeping peacefully upstairs. She thought of the other women Marcus had hurt. The fear was still there, but it was no longer in control. "I have to," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm not that girl in the soup line anymore. He can't silence me." The next day, she walked into a lawyer's office with Julian by her side. She was not a victim being dragged to testify. She was a woman walking willingly to reclaim her voice. She sat at a long, polished table and, in a clear, steady voice, she told her story. Every detail, every humiliation, every threat. She did not cry. She did not waver. She was no longer speaking from a place of fear, but from a place of strength. Her statement, combined with the evidence from the other women, was irrefutable. Marcus Thorne was arrested, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. The threat was not just neutralized, it was gone. Elara was finally, truly free. Spring arrived, washing the city in soft greens and pale sunlight. The scandal faded, replaced by the next news cycle. The house on the hill returned to its newfound peace, but it was a different kind of peace, deeper, more permanent. They had faced the storm together and had come out the other side, stronger and more united than before. The bond between Elara and Julian had been forged in crisis, and it was unbreakable. The quiet affection had deepened into a love that was as steady and profound as it was unspoken. One warm evening, they were in the garden. The air smelled of damp earth and blooming jasmine. Julian was pushing Lily on a swing, her laughter echoing in the twilight. Elara was sitting on a bench, watching them, a feeling of such complete and overwhelming happiness washing over her that it brought tears to her eyes. This was home. This was family. After tucking a tired Lily into bed, Julian found Elara still in the garden, looking up at the first stars pricking the velvet sky. He came and stood beside her, their shoulders almost touching. "It's over," she said softly. "It's really over." "Yes," he said. "It is." He turned to face her. The fading light softened the powerful lines of his face, revealing the gentle soul she had come to love. "Elara," he began, his voice low and serious. "When I met you, this place was just a house, a beautiful, empty shell. I was just a father, trying to keep my daughter's head above water while I was drowning myself." He took her hands in his. They were warm now. "You came in, and you taught it how to breathe again. You taught us how to breathe again. You and Lily, you brought this house back to life. You brought me back to life." His gaze was intense, full of a deep, soul-shaking emotion. "I can't imagine this life without you in it," he said, his voice thick. "I don't want to. I love you, Elara. Not because I want to protect you, but because you are my partner, my equal, the heart of this home." He took a deep breath. He didn't have a ring. He hadn't planned this. It was a moment of pure, unscripted truth. "Will you marry me? Will you be my wife? And let's make this our family officially?" Elara's heart stopped. Tears streamed freely down her face, but they were tears of joy, of disbelief, of a happiness so profound it felt holy. Before she could find her voice to answer, a small figure came running out of the house, her bare feet silent on the grass. It was Lily. She was supposed to be asleep. She ran right up to them, her face glowing with excitement. In her hand, she clutched a familiar, slightly crumpled piece of paper. It was the crayon drawing of the angel. "Say yes, Elara," Lily chirped, her voice full of urgent hope. "Please say yes, then you can be my angel mommy forever." Elara laughed through her tears. She knelt and pulled Lily into a fierce hug, burying her face in her daughter's hair. Her daughter. She looked up at Julian, her eyes shining with all the love in her heart. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times. Yes." The wedding was not a grand affair for the society pages. It was for them. It took place a month later, in the same garden where he had proposed. The guest list was small. A few of Julian's closest friends, his old housekeeper who had known Anya, and the kind-faced choir director from the church. Elara wore a simple, elegant ivory dress. She felt beautiful, not because of the dress, but because of the look in Julian's eyes as she walked toward him. He wasn't looking at a survivor he had rescued. He was looking at his wife, his partner, his equal. Lily was the flower girl, scattering white rose petals on the grass with solemn importance. She wore a small bracelet on her wrist, a tiny silver charm in the shape of an angel's wing, a gift from Elara. As Julian slid a simple, elegant diamond ring onto Elara's finger, he leaned in and whispered, "For my angel." She smiled, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. The story, however, doesn't end there. The real happily ever after isn't in the ceremony. It's in the small, quiet moments that follow. A few weeks later, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, the family was in the backyard. Julian was trying to teach Lily how to ride her new bicycle without training wheels. "You can do it, sweetie," he encouraged, jogging alongside her, his hand hovering over the back of the seat. "Just keep pedaling." Lily wobbled, her face a mask of concentration. She managed a few feet on her own before the bike tipped, and she tumbled onto the soft grass in a heap. Before Julian could even react, Elara was there. She ran from the patio, knelt beside Lily, and scooped her up into a hug. "Oh, sweet girl, are you okay?" she asked, her voice full of genuine concern. Lily had a small scrape on her knee. She looked at it, her lower lip trembling. Elara gently kissed the scrape. "There, all better." Lily's tears vanished. She wrapped her arms around Elara's neck. "Okay, Mommy, I'm ready to try again." Julian stopped a few feet away, watching them. He saw the easy, natural way Elara comforted their daughter. He saw the complete, unconditional trust in Lily's eyes as she looked at her new mother. In that moment, a profound sense of peace settled deep in his soul. He had started as a protector, a rescuer offering a hand to someone in the dark. But that was no longer his role. Elara was not broken. She was the strongest person he knew. She was the one who had healed them, who had filled their silent, empty house with laughter and love and the smell of baking cookies. The broken pieces had not just been mended. They had been built into a home,